The day I moved into the neighborhood, I already knew I wasn't welcome. I didn't need anyone to say it aloud. It was in the air, in the long stares from across manicured hedges, in the forced smiles that cracked under the weight of judgment. I remember stepping out of my truck, my boots hitting the concrete, and feeling the eyes on me from behind tinted windows. The neighbors didn't need to ask my name. They thought they already knew everything they needed to. They saw a moving van that wasn't branded with a luxury name, furniture that had seen use, and a man who didn't fit their curated image of suburban perfection. That was enough for them to decide I didn't belong. It started small. A man walking his dog paused in front of my lawn and looked at my garden hose like it was a crime. A woman jogging past in designer gear gave a polite nod, but her eyes scanned my porch like it offended her. There was no welcome committee, no plate of cookies, just cold looks and closed blinds. I kept to myself, minding my business, unloading boxes, setting up the place I was supposed to call home. But already, it felt like I had stepped into enemy territory. I grew up knowing what it was like to be looked down on. The clothes I wore, the cars my family drove, the jobs we took, they weren't flashy, but they were honest. My parents taught me to work hard, to keep my head up, and to never let someone else's opinion define my worth. Still, that didn't make this easier. In this neighborhood, wealth wasn't just about money. It was about performance. The right look, the right attitude, the right kind of people. And to them, I was the wrong kind of everything. The first week, I got a letter. The HOA had concerns. My mailbox wasn't regulation color. My trash bins weren't pulled in fast enough. My grass, which I'd barely had time to mow, was uneven. I fixed it all immediately. I thought maybe if I followed every rule, they'd give me a chance. Maybe if I showed I respected the neighborhood, they'd see me as something other than the poor guy who slipped through the cracks. But the letters kept coming, week after week, nitpicking things that made no difference. The curtain color inside my windows, the number of guests I had over, the fact that my brother's car stayed in the driveway for more than a night. It wasn't about the rules. It was about sending a message. They didn't want me here, and they were going to use every regulation they could find to try and push me out. It wasn't just the HOA either. Neighbors started treating me like a problem. I'd wave, and they'd look the other way. At meetings, I'd speak, and they'd act like I hadn't said a word. One afternoon, I overheard two board members talking near the clubhouse. "That guy's going to drag down the whole block," one said. The other laughed. "He's probably renting. Too poor to last more than a year." That was the moment it shifted. Not the first insult, not the last, but the one that stuck. Too poor. Like my entire existence could be summed up in those two words. Like I didn't deserve to live among them. That's when I stopped trying to fit in. I started watching, listening. I showed up to every HOA meeting, silent but alert. I read every bylaw. I learned how the association worked, who the power players were, where the cracks in their system hid. While they ignored me, I paid attention. While they tried to wear me down, I was getting stronger. They had written me off before they even knew my name. To them, I was just some guy from the wrong side of life who didn't understand how things worked. But what they didn't know, what they never bothered to learn, was that I wasn't just some blue-collar worker with a chip on his shoulder. I had plans. I had savings. I had drive. And while they were busy dismissing me as irrelevant, I was quietly becoming the most prepared person on the block. It wasn't long before the letters turned into a ritual. Every week, like clockwork, a new envelope showed up in my mailbox. Always the same stiff paper. Always the same smug tone, dressed up as neighborhood concern. The HOA had opinions about everything. The alignment of my trash bins, the exact height of my hedges, the tint of my porch light, even the way I parked my truck. Nothing was too small to become a problem. But the strange thing was I could walk down the block and see half a dozen other houses breaking the same rules. Unapproved garden flags, basketball hoops in driveways, mismatched fence paint. Yet none of those homes ever seemed to get the same attention. I tried to ignore it at first. I fixed what they asked. I adjusted, complied, tried to stay under the radar. But no matter what I did, the letters kept coming. It didn't take long to realize this wasn't about rule enforcement. It was targeted, deliberate, personal. The HOA was a shield, but behind it were people who didn't like me, didn't want me, and weren't afraid to use bureaucracy as a weapon. They didn't need to say it outright. The message was clear. I wasn't welcome here. The first time I attended an HOA meeting, I felt every eye in the room follow me. I wasn't dressed like the others. No golf polos, no diamond watches, no practiced plastic smiles. I stood at the back of the room and listened as the board went through its agenda. Landscaping contracts, noise complaints, community events. They spoke in that passive-aggressive tone that sounds friendly unless you're the one it's aimed at. When it came time for resident comments, I stepped up to the mic and asked a simple question. What's the process for challenging a violation? They looked at me like I'd interrupted a secret club. One board member gave a rehearsed answer, but I could tell he was annoyed I had even asked. After the meeting, no one approached me. No one welcomed me. It was like I didn't exist. Over time, I started seeing the patterns more clearly. There was a kind of unspoken hierarchy in the neighborhood, and it wasn't based on kindness, contribution, or even how well someone maintained their home. It was status, appearances, connections. The board was made up of longtime residents who had formed their own inner circle, and if you weren't part of it, you were always on the outside looking in. They used the HOA rules like tools, or more accurately like weapons. And the rules weren't enforced equally. They were enforced selectively, conveniently, strategically. I began documenting everything. Photos, dates, correspondences. I kept every letter, printed every email, took pictures of violations at other homes that were ignored while mine were punished. I wasn't collecting evidence to fight them. Not yet. I just wanted to understand the game. If they were going to keep targeting me, I wanted to know how they operated. I studied the bylaws, learned the exact procedures for appeals, researched the laws governing homeowners associations in our state. And as I dug deeper, I realized something. The HOA wasn't just unfair. It was vulnerable. Most residents didn't care about the inner workings of the HOA. They just paid their dues and assumed the board would handle things. But I saw how unchecked that power had become, how a few people could wield it to shape the neighborhood in their own image and to push out anyone who didn't fit. I started to see the fear behind their actions. They were afraid of change, afraid of someone like me, someone who didn't come from their world, who didn't speak their language, who wouldn't quietly play along. They thought the rules would be enough to wear me down. They thought bureaucracy would break me. What they didn't realize was that I dealt with worse. I dealt with layoffs, late rent, broken down cars, and long hours on my feet. A petty letter from a neighborhood board wasn't going to stop me. In fact, the more they pushed, the more determined I became. Every notice they sent, every smug signature at the bottom, every meeting they tried to ignore me in, it only sharpened my focus. I wasn't just living in their neighborhood anymore. I was learning how it worked. And the more I learned, the more I realized that the people trying to push me out weren't nearly as powerful as they thought. They were just hiding behind rules they didn't expect anyone to question. It was almost comical the way they tried to humiliate me. At first, it was subtle, snide comments dressed as compliments, questions that weren't really questions at all. That your truck out front? Must be reliable, right? Or, you do your own yard work. That's admirable. It was the tone that gave it away, the smug little smiles, the way their eyes scanned me like I was a blemish on their perfect street. They didn't say I didn't belong, not directly. They didn't have to. It was in every sideways glance, every fake laugh, every forced nod when I passed by on the sidewalk. But the day it shifted from quiet judgment to open mockery, I remember it clearly. I had just finished fixing a broken railing on my porch, my hands still covered in dust and sweat. A few of them, HOA members, neighbors, the self-appointed royalty of the block, were chatting near the clubhouse. I walked past, nodded politely, and one of them, thinking I was out of earshot, said loud enough for the others to hear, "This isn't a construction site." They laughed. It was a cheap laugh, the kind that people use when they don't have anything real to say. The kind of laugh that says more about their fear than their confidence. That was the moment something in me flipped. I wasn't angry, not in the way they probably expected. I was motivated, because what they saw as an insult, the truck, the boots, the sweat, the work, those were the things I was proud of. I didn't come from a world of catered brunches and country clubs. I came from a world where you built what you needed, where you fixed what was broken, where your word mattered more than your watch. They mocked the very things that had gotten me this far. That didn't make me feel small. It reminded me of how far I'd come. They thought their jokes were harmless, just neighbors having a laugh. But they were building something without realizing it, a fire inside me, one insult at a time. Every passive-aggressive note, every meeting they ignored me in, every rule they twisted just to make my life harder, it all added fuel. I started waking up earlier, working harder, saving more. Not because I needed to prove anything to them, but because I realized how much I wanted to change the game they thought they owned. The irony was thick. They mocked me for doing my own repairs while paying someone else to mow their lawn. They laughed at my old truck while taking out loans for luxury cars they couldn't afford. They saw wealth in appearances. I saw it in ownership, in freedom, in not owing anyone anything. And every time they tried to make me feel lesser, it reminded me that I was playing a different game entirely, and I was winning quietly. I started paying attention to the cracks in their perfect little world. The couple 2 doors down with 2 mortgages and a pool they never finished. The HOA treasurer who was always one step behind on paperwork, juggling things he didn't fully understand. The president who bragged about control but couldn't fix a leaky faucet without calling 3 contractors. They were fragile. All of them. And that's why they needed the rules, the uniforms, the perfect lawns, because without them, they had nothing to stand on. What they didn't understand was that people like me, the ones they laughed at, were used to being underestimated. We don't take shortcuts. We don't expect applause. We build slowly, quietly, from the ground up. And while they were busy laughing at my boots, I was calculating interest rates. While they were mocking my lawn, I was researching property records. I wasn't just surviving in their neighborhood. I was preparing for something bigger. The HOA could find me. The neighbors could mock me. But none of it changed the fact that I knew who I was, and I knew where I was going. I had dealt with harder people in tougher places. I'd faced job losses, empty fridges, nights wondering if the power would stay on. These people and their petty games didn't scare me. They reminded me that I didn't need their approval. I didn't want their acceptance. I was there for something else entirely. And the more they tried to push me out, the more determined I became to stay. And not just stay, but rise. Patience has never been something this neighborhood respected. Around here, it's all about the quick win. Fast cars, flashy renovations, instant gratification. They judge success by how loud you could announce it, how big the party was when you got promoted, how fast you could get the kitchen remodeled after moving in. But I wasn't raised like that. I learned early that real success isn't loud. It's quiet. It's slow. It's deliberate. It doesn't need to be announced, because the results will speak when the time is right. And so, while they gossiped over mimosas and tried to make me feel small, I kept my head down. I worked. I waited. I watched. They thought their words would wear me down. They thought a man like me, someone who worked with his hands and kept to himself, couldn't possibly understand the world they lived in. They saw my silence as weakness, my patience as ignorance. But I wasn't just tolerating them. I was learning. Every HOA meeting I attended, even when they pretended I wasn't there, I was studying how decisions were made. I paid attention to who spoke with authority, who deferred to whom, who had personal agendas behind the rules they pushed. I kept track of the votes, the spending, the patterns. They saw someone sitting quietly in the back. What they didn't realize was that I was memorizing the entire board. At home, I kept working. I poured every extra dollar into paying down my mortgage. No upgrades, no vacations, no flashy purchases. Just the basics, the things that mattered. I didn't care about impressing anyone on this street. I cared about freedom. I didn't want to owe anyone. I didn't want to be owned by anyone. Every time they laughed at my truck, I reminded myself that it was paid off. Every time they commented on my modest landscaping, I reminded myself that I didn't have a dime of debt. While they kept up appearances, I was building real equity. Quietly, consistently, patiently. They couldn't see it because they weren't looking. They were too distracted by their own reflections, too busy playing their roles as kings and queens of the cul-de-sac. And that was their biggest weakness. They thought the neighborhood revolved around them. They never once considered that someone outside their circle could beat them at their own game. But I wasn't trying to beat them. I was playing a different game entirely, one that didn't depend on approval or applause, one that was built on patience, preparation, and timing. There were moments when it was hard to hold back, times when I wanted to confront them, to throw their hypocrisy in their faces, to show them I wasn't the man they thought I was. But I knew better. They were expecting an outburst, waiting for me to snap, so they could point and say, "See, he's not one of us." So I gave them nothing, just silence and a smile. Let them underestimate me. Let them think they'd won. Because the longer they ignored me, the more invisible I became. And the more invisible I became, the easier it was to see everything they tried to hide. I started noticing things they didn't want noticed. The treasurer who struggled to balance the books. The vice president who had quietly put his house up for sale. The cliques forming cracks. Board members starting to disagree behind closed doors. The facade of unity was crumbling, slowly, quietly, but surely. And while they were distracted trying to preserve their image, I was planning something entirely different. In the meantime, I made alliances, quiet ones. Not everyone in the neighborhood was part of the elite circle. Some are newer, like me. Some had their own run-ins with the HOA. I listened. I helped when I could. Fixed things for free. Gave advice without being asked. Built trust, not with everyone, but with enough people to matter when the time came. No speeches, no drama. Just a quiet network of folks who were just as tired of the power games as I was. All the while, I kept building, financially, mentally, strategically. They were still laughing at the guy with the old truck, still sending their little letters, still convinced I'd eventually give up and move out. But I wasn't going anywhere. I wasn't just staying. I was planting roots so deep they'd have to dig through bedrock to get rid of me. Because while they spent their time looking down at me, I was building a foundation that would outlast every last one of their hollow reputations. The house went on the market without much noise. No balloons, no open house signs, no extravagant listings like the others usually had. Just a plain white for sale, sign stuck in the grass one morning like it had grown there overnight. But I noticed it the moment it appeared. I always noticed things in that part of the neighborhood. Not because I was nosy, but because I had been watching that house for years. It was the biggest one on the block, the one they decorated like a magazine cover every winter, the one where all the HOA board meetings were hosted for years. It wasn't just a house, it was a symbol, and now it was available. No one else thought it was strange that it was being sold so quietly. The family that owned it, the former president of the HOA and his wife, had been the loudest voices when I first moved in. They'd written most of the violation letters I received. They hosted the barbecues I was never invited to. They were the gatekeepers, the power couple, the unofficial monarchs of the cul-de-sac. So when their house went up for sale without a word, I knew something was off. Maybe money trouble, maybe personal drama. Whatever it was, it didn't matter to me. What mattered was that the house, their house, was suddenly within reach. I've been preparing for a moment like this. Years of saving, cutting expenses, staying quiet. I didn't have a financial advisor or a trust fund, but I knew how to make money stretch. I had watched the market, followed every property that sold in the neighborhood, studied the trends. I knew how to negotiate. I knew how to move fast. And most of all, I knew that opportunities like this didn't announce themselves. They whispered. And if you weren't listening closely, you missed them. The same day the sign went up, I called the agent. No hesitation, no need to think it over. I knew what I wanted. I asked for a showing and was told there was already interest, but I could come by that afternoon. I showed up early, not in a suit, not with a real estate team. Just me, in clean jeans and a plain shirt, clipboard in hand. I walked through the house slowly, taking it all in. The crown molding, the marble countertops, the polished floors, all the things they used to boast about. But what I saw was something else. I saw a house that was once used to keep me out, and now it was just sitting there, empty, waiting. I didn't make a fuss. I didn't brag or overplay my hand. I thanked the agent, went home, and ran the numbers. The price was steep, but not out of reach. Especially not for someone who had been living below his means, paying down debt, building silently. I put in my offer that night. Cash, no contingencies, no games. The kind of offer people dream of. The kind that makes sellers reconsider everything else on the table. The next morning, I got the call. The house was mine. There was no celebration, no champagne, just quiet satisfaction. I didn't need a party. I didn't need to tell anyone. I just sat on my porch, the same one I'd been mocked for, and looked down the street at the house I had just bought. The one that used to host the meetings where they laughed at me. The one where decisions were made to keep me in my place. The one that used to stand as a reminder that I didn't belong. It was mine now, not out of revenge, not to make a statement, but because I had waited. I had planned. I had been patient in a neighborhood that didn't know the meaning of the word. And while they were busy building appearances, I was building ownership. I didn't need to knock on their doors and announce it. I didn't need to wave from the balcony. Just the fact that the sale went through, quietly and cleanly, was enough. It was a shift they didn't see coming because they never imagined someone like me would last, let alone rise. And that was their mistake. They thought silence was weakness. They thought patience was passivity. They thought being underestimated meant being incapable. But they forgot that real change doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it comes with a key. The first morning I woke up in that house, the light came through the same windows that once framed the neighborhood's most exclusive gatherings. The marble floors were cold under my feet. The air still carried the scent of fresh paint, and the rooms were filled with silence. Not the empty kind, but the peaceful kind, the kind that follows a long war you've quietly won. I stood in the kitchen they used to brag about in every HOA newsletter, brewed a cup of coffee, and stepped out onto the front porch. The same porch where the old owners used to look down on people like me. Now it was mine. I didn't need to announce it. The neighbors already knew. Word spread fast in a place like this, especially when it was the former HOA president's house that had changed hands. They didn't see it coming. I don't think they ever thought I'd still be around, let alone in a position to buy the house that represented everything they once used to shut me out. I wasn't just living in the neighborhood anymore. I was rooted here, planted, immovable. It's strange how the tone shifts when the balance of power changes. The same people who once avoided eye contact now wave awkwardly as they pass. The ones who used to call in every minor violation now smile. Too wide, too forced. They don't know what to do with me anymore. I no longer fit their script. I'm no longer the outsider, the handyman, the rule breaker they could rally against in HOA meetings. I became something they never planned for, a permanent neighbor. One they couldn't push out, fine into submission, or dismiss with a whisper. It wasn't about revenge. It never really was. I didn't buy the house to prove a point, but standing there on that porch, I couldn't ignore the irony. This house was once a weapon. It was where they plotted letters and complaints, where they built their little empire of neighborhood control. It was the throne from which they ruled with passive-aggressive smiles and arbitrary rules. And now it was just a house, with fresh paint, open windows, and a new owner who didn't need to prove anything to anyone. The mailbox still had the old name on it. I hadn't changed it yet. I left it there for a while, not out of sentiment, but as a quiet reminder of what this neighborhood used to be and what it was becoming. I didn't plan to run the HOA. I didn't need the title. Power didn't interest me the way it did them. What mattered was peace. What mattered was living on a street where you didn't have to pretend, where you didn't have to apologize for where you came from or how you chose to live. I fixed things around the house slowly, carefully. The repairs were intentional, not showy. I took down the over-the-top security system that monitored the street like a fortress, replaced the floodlights with soft, warm ones, replanted the flower beds with native plants, not the ornamental kind that needed constant maintenance just to impress. I made it mine, piece by piece, not by erasing its history, but by reclaiming its future. People started noticing. A neighbor from 3 houses down stopped by one afternoon to ask about the plants. Another asked if I could recommend a contractor. A younger couple, new to the neighborhood, waved every morning on their walk. Slowly, subtly, the tone of the block was changing. The quiet was no longer tense. It was calm. The shift wasn't loud, but it was real. Not everyone liked it, of course. Some still avoided me. Some still drove past my house with their eyes fixed forward. But others, the ones who had also felt small here, started holding their heads a little higher. That's the thing about neighborhoods. They're not just made of houses. They're made of people. And when people decide to live differently, the whole street changes. I didn't come here to tear anyone down. I came here to live, to build, to belong, not by fitting in, but by refusing to shrink. And that's what this house became. Not a trophy, not a prize, but proof. Proof that quiet strength can outlast loud judgment. That patience can flip a power structure. That ownership doesn't have to look like arrogance or sound like applause. Sometimes, it just looks like a man sipping his coffee on a porch they said he'd never earn, in a house they never thought he'd own.